Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi and this is Pauper Shopper, where we're going to talk about the common cards from Aether across multiple formats and try and get a better understanding of their likely impact on those formats. Some of you did notice that I did not do a Pauper Shopper for the recent Foundation set, and that was for two reasons. One was some security irregularities with my MTGO account that made researching somewhat difficult, as well as just the sheer number of common rarity cards in that set. The two combined, it was just a little overwhelming. But hey, we're back and we are planning to do this for every single Premier set release. But before we get into all that, let's not forget that Aether Drift is a story of speed and competition, sometimes with violent consequences, and of course, it's also a love story. But perhaps most importantly, it's a great little reminder that you need to race right over to my Twitch affiliate channel and subscribe right away, because not only do I stream over there 3 or more times a week on average, there is a 2-week video on demand archive for you, all absolutely free. Link in the description. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, right. Attempting to analyze commons even from a single set requires a lot of attention. But unlike Jaden Smith, we're talking about attention to detail here. You see, probably 90% of commons are going to be impactful in the limited environment they were released in. And we've got even more to talk about this time around, because in the next couple weeks, Arena is going to be adding a never-before-seen format, Standard Pauper. And a lot of those commons from Aether Drift and beyond are likely to have impact there, maybe as much as 30-35%. Beyond that, of course, we've got your 60-card constructed formats, and those become much more restrictive, particularly as a format reaches back into older cards and has a larger potential pool. A common really needs to be doing something noteworthy to be useful there. And of course, this becomes even more true with Historic Pauper and MTGO's Pauper proper, if you would. For those that may have not already heard, they are introducing that new Standard Pauper format through Midweek Magic right at the end of February, the 25th through the 27th. And it's exactly what you would think. You've got to build a 60-card standard legal deck using only commons and basic lands. It's a thing they've never done before, not really sure what the format's going to look like, but of course for our Midweek Magic Primer, we are going to have multiple budget-friendly options available for you, even budget-friendly by Pauper standards.
Hold position.
But while that standard Pauper meta is a little difficult to predict before it even starts, the MTGO Pauper meta is alive and well. As you can see, the ever-popular Mono Red Burn is in there as a very budget-friendly deck. This is very similar to what I have suggested multiple times as part of the Wax solution. It's the cheapest deck in the format and the most played. Right behind that, for play popularity, we see the ever-strong Grixis Affinity decks, and then, of course, the other usual suspects, including Broodscale variants, as well as mono blue flyers. When you're in that MTGO economy, you can expect that a proper Pauper deck is going to run you probably 50 to 100 tickets on the low end, and there's a few exceptional ones that can go a bit beyond that as well. Sadly, Arena's answer, Historic Pauper, is a little harder to predict because of the intermittent nature of the format itself. And speaking of Historic Pauper, Galvanic Blast's inclusion as a special guest in the Aether Drift release is starting to make Grixis Affinity look more and more like a real deck on that format. Really, the only thing that we're arguably missing at this point beyond Lightning Bolt, which we're never going to get, is the mono red artifact land. And we know that there's not a scheduled direct to eternal release for the 2025 calendar year for Arena. That doesn't mean that they won't do an anthology release. And given the fact that it has been since July of 2023 since we've seen an anthology release on Arena, I'd bet even money that we're going to see one for historic or potentially multiple formats. I'm sure it comes as no surprise that the Ether Drift set is bringing a lot of artifacts to the various formats, including the common-centric Pauper formats, but only one of those cards actually says Affinity on the card, and that is Gear Seeker Serpent, a 7-mana 5/6, and you can make it unblockable for a total of 6 mana. All in all, this is an Arena reprint, but it was never released as part of a standard release on Arena, so it's very unlikely that this reprint status actually affects very many of you. Ether Drift also brings with it a total of 9 vehicles at common, and previously Magic the Gathering only had 15 in total, so this is fairly significant. And of course, those 9 vehicles can be found across all 5 of the primary colors, as well as a single colorless entry. There is also a number of common cards that care about or interact with vehicles in particular. Surprise, surprise, removal and combat tricks are almost always going to be good in limited environments. And of course, some of those are going to translate very nicely into the upcoming standard Pauper format. But the larger the card pool gets, the more difficult it is to be recognized as a good, valuable card. Take Lightning Strike, for example. It's good in every limited format it's ever been printed in. But when you look at the MTGO Pauper proper format, this is almost never sees play because, of course, that format has access to Lightning Bolt. Alright, so what do you say we dive into those common cards from Ether Drift that I think have a lot of potential to make a splash somewhere? And I tried to narrow this down to basically 1 card per color. Starting off with white, we've got Lotus Guard Disciple. A 3-mana 2/2 is not great stats, but when you add in flying, evasion is generally going to make up the difference there. With this one, while it's not quite a combat trick, when this creature enters, target creature or vehicle gains lifelink and indestructible until end of turn. So not only do you get a consequence-free attack, but you get the added benefit of picking up some life along the way. And I believe Nimble Thopterist is going to be blue's heavy hitter here. A 4-mana 3/2 again is not great base stats, but when it enters you create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So getting a token that is also an artifact and an evasive creature will probably make up the difference here just from a value perspective. This should at least be a limited star, and I would not be surprised at all if it made a name for itself in standard Pauper as well. But as the formats and their card pools enlarge, this one is probably not going to make the same sort of impact. It's also worth taking note that Bounce Off is a strictly better unsummon, although its ability to target vehicles that have not been crewed is pretty corner case, and unless vehicles make a much bigger impact on Pauper in general, this one is probably not that big of a difference. I will bet you dollars to donuts that Grim Bauble is going to be black's best common out of this set. 1 black mana gets you an artifact. When it enters, you give a target creature an opponent controls -2/-2 until end of turn. And if that's not enough, it hangs around on the battlefield until you pay 3 and sacrifice the artifact to Surveil 2. All in all, this is going to be a star all the way from limited for Ether Drift to MTGO, Pauper, Proper. This is going to be a thing in affinity decks, I'm nearly certain. Red's Burner Rocket has almost as much potential as a 2-mana 3/1 artifact vehicle with flash, so technically this is also a combat trick. When it ETBs, target creature you control gains +2/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. And of course, as a vehicle, it crews for 1. This is definitely going to be a limited star. It is probably going to show up in standard Pauper, and might even make a difference in all the way up scale to things like MTGO's Pauper format. It just fits too well into those Grixis affinities as a combat trick and things like that. I'd keep a close eye on this and consider getting your copies early. Now, I really tried to shy away from things that were just strictly removal or strictly combat tricks, but when it comes to green, the real standout here is Run Over, 2-mana instant that costs 1 less to cast if it targets a mount or vehicle. Now, I'm not saying this will necessarily make much of a show in standard Pauper, although it might. Of course, limited, it's going to have its places as well, and this is almost certain to show up in at least budget-friendly mount vehicle constructed decks. It's just such an upgrade to something like green-white mounts. I don't think, however, that it's going to show up in larger 60-card constructed or in the more pronounced proper Pauper format available on MTGO. So there it is, guys. That's my thoughts on the commons made available through Aetherdrift. I would definitely keep an eye on these various cards and be aware of the fact that MTGO's marketplace will go live tomorrow. And or if any of these are on your shopping list, I would make every effort to pick them up at bulk rates as soon as possible before other people figure out how good these cards can be. Even if they don't make the impact right away, it's very likely that these will come up as viable for Pauper in the future. And before we go, while every member of this community is important to me, I just wanted to take a moment and give a shout out to those patrons providing financial support and keeping the Stronghold from being a complete financial black hole. And of course, let me leave you with some suggestions for your next step here on the channel.